All right. Well, hello again, Brad. After some technical difficulties, we've switched hosting technology, and we're going to try this again. But anyway, I'm glad to have Brad with me back on the sort of episodic Random Walk podcast. I've had Brad before. Brad is, for the uninitiated, is the founder among other things, the founder of Common, founder of General Assembly, and currently Thesis Driven, which is a newsletter focused on real estate technology and other things generally sounding in that vein. And of particular interest to Random Walk as of late is Brad wrote a piece on niche strategies in real estate, and in the general sort of new and different in capital markets. That seemed interesting to me, so I wanted to dive right in. So thanks for coming. And what's your favorite niche? Let's
First,
go right into it.
Moses, thanks so much for having me on. Appreciate it. Having me on again. So my favorite niche. Oh well, it's hard to pick between. It's like picking between your children. But if I had to
I can
pick
do that
one,
easily.
I guess I could too. Yeah, I guess I have three now, so it gets easier when the numbers get bigger.
That's right.
So I'd have to say land development. And not a lot of people know what land development is, but it's the only niche that I've profiled on Thesis Driven. Did a deep dive on it. I've done a couple of deep dives into like rural land development. And, I don't often invest in the people I profile. Sometimes I do. I don't often. But it's the only one where I've tried to be an LP. I went to one of the land developers I met. I was like, what you're doing is really cool. It's awesome. Are you raising money? You need LPs behind these deals. And he's like, nah, we're good. It's the only time that's happened. And so,
So,
if I had to
so
pick
what
one,
is
I
it?
would say rural land development.
So what does that mean? Like that means like clearing it, getting it entitled, connected to the grid, things like that.
Yeah, well, normally not clearing it. Usually if there's timber, you want to keep the timber, but it's basically buying wholesale and selling retail. So you go out in a rural area, maybe you find on-market stuff, maybe you're sending out a bunch of mailers and generating off-market. Regardless, you're going out, you're buying 300 acres, 400 acres of rural land, subdividing it, almost always, running power, running water, running roads, marketing it to primarily retail buyers, people who want to build a house out in the country, people who, occasionally people who want a little bit of hunting land or something, depending on where exactly it is. Is this going to be a subdivision? Is this going to be country houses? What have you? So, really, I was so compelled by rural land development. It sounds fun too. I mean, you're going out into the country and you're Polaris, running around taking photos, getting your drone in the air. It just sounds like a fun time too.
And but I guess what in particular about it was so attractive? Is it just like you don't think enough people are doing it, or is it just that it just sounds appealing from like an operational standpoint?
Well, I mean, certainly from like an aesthetic standpoint, it sounds appealing. I mean, as I just mentioned, you're getting out into the country. The returns are also, at least, I saw some of the numbers and some of the inside of these deals. Over a 12 to 18 month period, normally you are, generating, one and a half, 2x sometimes. You do have land. You don't usually use a lot of leverage in this market. So your downside is somewhat limited. Kind of the worst case scenario is you kind of get stuck and you have to sell your land at a discount because, you couldn't subdivide it or, it turns out it's a wetland or something like that. But you can actually, in the diligence process, mitigate against both those things. So, on many other risks too. So I found that to be really compelling, in terms of a lot of the fundamentals of how it works as a real estate development business.
Wait, so in 18 months, a sponsor can go out and buy huge tracts of undeveloped land and sell it off in parcels such that you can 2x your money in a year and a half?
The deals I was seeing, there were certainly that and more. And I don't like the
Wow.
and more. I don't know how much that's just like he's getting deals off market. There's definitely off market deals in there where, he told me some stories about how, that you'd have a busted title on a site. So like it's a family, there's 18 different people in the mix. Nobody really knows who owns what. So you got to get in there and sort all that out. So you can't exactly look at it on like a dollar over dollar IRR basis because there is a lot of sweat equity in this. So it's, yes, you do see those return numbers, but you also have to take into account like the work that was generated. It's not passive income for sure. But the
Got
work
it.
you're doing, I don't know, sounds fun.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's right. It's passive for the LPs, I guess, but not necessarily for the GP.
Right. That's why I wanted to be an LP, and that's why he probably told me
Right.
no.
Yeah. So why don't more people do it? It's just because it's a lot of work, or if
It's
there's
a lot
yeah,
of
I don't know.
work. It's also like it doesn't scale. Like it does not scale in any way, shape, or form. Like you're not gonna get PGIM coming in and saying, "Hey, we're putting $500 million into rural land development." Like you just can't find that many sites and entitle them. I mean, maybe someone's going to try to do some crazy shit of like set up an office in the Philippines to like just send out mailers and do initial prospecting calls with rural landowners and being like, "Hey, do you want to sell? Do you have a weird title issue?" Maybe someone will
I was
try to
kind of.
scale it, but I can't. That would be breaking my
That was
brain to
also
try
my
to figure
question:
that
is
out.
who owns this stuff? Is it just like I would? You're not buying it from the states or from some housing authority, or maybe you are. I don't know, but I guess it varies.
It's usually individuals, like families that have held this stuff for generations. Sometimes it's like rural land trusts and things like that, but like it's usually families that, this was, Grandpappy's farm. And, since Grandpappy passed away, it got passed down to the grandkids. And like there's 20 of them and they fight all the time. And 2 of them are meth heads. And like, what are you going to do? So the
Yeah.
field just sits there. And it's 300 acres and it takes one of these land developers to come along and say, hey, let's sort all this out. Let's run a legal process, and you can create value in doing that. I mean, look, I grew up in rural Arkansas, so there's a lot of this stuff out there, and most of it's been, bought up by, initially paper companies and eventually, private equity firms, insurance companies, family offices, what have you. But there's still a lot of it out there.
Yeah, you see it occasionally, like in upstate New York and things like that, or
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe not, but I just like you see signs for people advertising. What's an obviously ridiculous niche that you would never touch with a 10-foot pole, if you're allowed to say?
Oh man, I feel like anything that is going to get blown up by autonomous vehicles,
Ooh, that was okay.
car
Good, go on. That was
washes,
good.
gas stations, parking garages. You know, I'm I am a believer, as I think you know, in a driverless future. Not that everyone will be forced to have a driverless car, but that it will be ubiquitous and cheap, that you could call a driverless car to take you from, pretty much any point A to point B in any condition. That's coming in 5 years, if not sooner. And anything that is on the wrong side of that from a real estate standpoint, I would not touch.
So you think all of the PE car wash roll up plays are they're toast?
Toast.
I guess
Absolutely
Waymo
toast.
has. Yeah, I guess they have to clean those cars too, but probably not on a one each basis.
Yeah, but they'll
So
have like a giant servicing warehouse, like 60 miles outside of town in some industrial park in central New Jersey, and like that's where they charge them and wash them
clean
and
them.
make sure they have like candy in the you know glove compartment or
Yeah,
something.
and air fresheners, but the so that was actually a question I was going to ask because like maybe you've seen it, but I certainly haven't. Is like why isn't like a Waymo optimized development a niche that people are working on? Like I don't even know what that looks like, but it's like okay, we know if I agree with you, I think self driving is going to come pretty quickly, more quickly than people expect because they've it's a post hype sleeper. It's people have been talking about it for a long time, but presumably that should unlock all kinds of places for development that if we pay a huge premium for being close to a train station then presumably you should see some comparable value that's being unlocked by self-driving but what is that is anybody building around that have you seen anything like that
Well, I would say two things. One is self-driving has only been obvious, I would say, for about 12 months if you're paying attention. If you're only sort of paying attention, it's only been obvious for maybe about 4 months. So that's not a long time for like real estate capital markets to move. And remember, we're also facing huge headwinds of, high interest rates, high construction costs, uncertainty around the election, whatever, where not a lot has been moving in, say, the past 6 months. So
Yeah.
that's one. The second is, remember, the further you get away from a city, like every mile you travel outside the city, the amount of potential locations that you could build increases to the second power. So, okay, great. You want to invest in, Waymo powered real estate. That means you can be further away from New York, SF Bay Area, Boston, DC, the big metro centers. But where? Like, are you going in the Hudson Valley? Are you going in the Adirondacks? Are you going in the Poconos? Like, so I think there's just a little bit of like, okay, cool. I could pick a town. I'm actually working on an article right now called "The In Search of the Walkable Exurban Downtown." It's kind of a follow up to a piece I wrote a couple months ago about basically arguing that exurban sprawl has accelerated and shows no sign of stopping anytime soon. And so this is kind of an attempt to answer the next point of like, well, if it's just going to keep going out and out and out, where can you find a premium in that? And kind of settling on this idea of the walkable exurban downtown, if people still want kind of like the simulacra of walkability and density, even if it is in kind of an exurban environment. And I look at a bunch of places like McKinney, Texas, Westchester, Pennsylvania, Morristown, New Jersey, that kind of fit this walkable exurban downtown model that I think is going to be really successful over the next 10 years and is going to benefit from Waymo. And it's also going to be a hot spot for corporate headquarter relocations, which I think a lot of people are underestimating today.
That's interesting. Yeah, it just is like the return to office. There's some wind in their sails, although I think it's probably a little bit overrated. Right. I think there is. We're just as that's happening, we're opening up more possibilities for people, I think, to live farther away and still commute, but just makes that commute a lot more reasonable. How's cul-de-sac doing? Do you know?
They built their thing in Tempe. I know they're working on a couple of other deals. I think there's I don't know how much of this is public, but I know they have, I think, two others in the works, both in the Sun Belt. I think the concept is really cool. They are a real estate developer at the end of the day. I think it's tough to, I know from firsthand experience, tough to combine that with a venture-backed model. So how they square that circle, I don't know, but I hope more people do what they're doing and, bet on dense walkable communities. I think that, autonomous vehicles are a tailwind for that kind of thing. Because people still
People
do
like
want this like
it's
walkability if you can combine that with like space and access.
it's a Goldilocks. People like a little density, but not too much, and they like to be able to get away from it, fairly easily, not like going through the Lincoln Tunnel, things like that. So you touched on something else. Like, I guess. Well, actually, one other question: are there? You think there are niches that we should we should be seeing, but we don't? And I guess there's a related sort of question is just like, are there niches in other countries maybe? Like, if you were to do comparative real estate niches, is there something you've seen somewhere else? You're like, that'd be cool. We should have those here.
It's a great question. I would say like, a lot of other countries, particularly in the developing world, are much better at building new cities and new places than we are. I mean, I do this roundup once per year where I look basically at all the new cities around the world and I'm like, who's actually building them? How are they all doing? It's my favorite. I think it's my favorite recurring thesis driven article we do. And they're almost all the ones that are making serious progress. They're almost all in the developing world. Now, the biggest ones are more or less autocracies that are, building new cities, whether for a personal vanity project by the autocrat or building something that's a little less like coup prone. So you mostly have that. But even outside of that, I mean, Indonesia is building a huge new capital right now in Borneo, mostly because Jakarta is literally sinking. And, it's cool that they're doing that. There's no practical way for like global capital markets to access those things right now. I don't know how compelling that would be if there were, but I would love to see more of that in the United States. I met a group the other day that was actually starting a REIT to invest in new urbanist communities, which I thought was very cool. I mean, the problem,
Yeah, what does that mean?
well, new urbanist is like, walkable exurban downtowns, like little
Sure.
dense communities. The problem is the REIT model doesn't work well for development. You can't do real estate development out of a REIT. You can only buy stabilized assets into a REIT. So it kind of begs
Yeah.
the question of like, well, then you have to create some forward purchase structure whereby the REIT is buying assets from a captive real estate developer at some predetermined. It's super confusing. So I
Why
think
would
they're
they do
doing
this?
cool stuff, but it's a hard problem to solve with a REIT.
Yeah. Um, I guess like some of the things that I think, and maybe I actually don't have a good, international comp for it, but like some of the like in terms of some of the niches you wrote about, one of them is like childcare, right? And like
Yeah.
it just it seems like we don't do that terrible. Like there should be a lot more places where childcare should be able to go relative to where it currently is, and I'm trying to think if I can think of an example. Like why aren't there more childcare in apartment buildings or things like that? Maybe there are, but I don't think that there are. Right?
There should be way more childcare centers. And I think, there's a lot of layers to that problem. It's not a simple problem with one solution, but you can propose solutions that make sense. I personally think there should be a federal ban on any land use prohibitions to childcare.
Okay.
Like, I
I like
don't
it.
believe as part, like, I'm big on family oriented agenda. And I think, and I understand why like most federal YIMBY laws are controversial, but I think you could create bipartisan support for a law that said local municipalities cannot prohibit childcare as a use in any residential zone. And that should get bipartisan support. It is absurd that a city or a suburb can say you cannot run a child care facility in this neighborhood because people don't like listening to the sounds of children. It's
Right. Well,
ridiculous.
I mean, won't they just do it by any? They'll say, well, we'll just put. You could do it, but you have to meet all of these, safety regula. Well, they'll call them safety regulations, but that would make it basically impossible for most people to do it anyway.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to like end around that kind of thing, but I think as a statement, certainly it would point in the right direction.
Yeah, it's funny because you mentioned Tenafly, which is near me. And I tend to think of Tenafly as a pretty kid friendly place, relatively speaking. Um, yeah, it was sort of interesting to see that as the chosen example as a place where there were particular barriers to entry. Um, like I'm jumping around a little bit, but I guess like do you see like any specific headwinds or tailwinds right now for niche strategies
No, I mean
other than I guess capital markets? But
there's a huge tailwind in that just doing vanilla multifamily, vanilla industrial doesn't generate the return that capital's looking for right now. You can't just go out to the market and be like, we are buying apartments with a value add strategy in the Sun Belt. Like, it just doesn't pencil. It doesn't work. So, like,
yeah,
the only way as a sponsor you are going to appeal to the capital markets today is with a niche strategy of some sort. And that niche strategy might be we're going into tertiary markets. It might be we have some, weird off-market sourcing opportunity. It's got to be something unique. But what a lot of people are doing are saying, hey, we are identifying a piece of real estate, a type of real estate that has some unique characteristics, be it operational or physical, that hasn't really been aggregated or rolled up in any meaningful way, and we're going to do that. And we hope that in the course of us rolling up this portfolio that We will prove operating metrics through business cycles. And at the other end, we will have a portfolio of highly valuable assets that some big allocator will say, hey, this is interesting. Let's buy this portfolio or roll it into something else. And you'll benefit from cap rate compression. So that's a tried and true real estate strategy.
Right. It's to find the fragmented pieces that are subscale for a larger operator, but if you put them all together, then you can find an end buyer there. So is that like, I guess from a like if you're allocating capital, not like a PGIM, not a huge place, but let's say you're a family office or somebody smaller. How do you like why should you be looking? Why should you look at these things? Is it just for competitive yields, or is it something? And I guess then on the flip side of it is why is it then so challenging to raise money for it?
Well, competitive yields are certainly helpful. And, a lot of family office investors particular get in on this and say like, hey, we can take an OpCo PropCo strategy. We can back an operator and like own the real estate assets that we believe will appreciate long term. So like there's a lot of ways to generate alpha with these kind of niche strategies. Now, it's hard to raise capital for anything right now, and niche strategies have their own headwinds too. You have to validate that like there are operators that can run this stuff out there, that it's not a super thin market, that there will be an exit on the other end of these portfolios, of these assets you're rolling up, and that you've seen this go back to the examples of things like student housing that have gone through this arc of institutionalization from kind of being a fringe to, not a main food group of real estate, but at least something people point to and be like, hey, there's established operators, established REITs, established buyers, established cap rates out in the market. There's, CBRE, JLL putting out research reports, quarterly reports on the state of the market. Like it's a proper asset class. So
sure, like self storage, build to rent, those also were sort of fringy at the beginning, and they just got huge.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I guess it does. Like, I mean, one of the things I think about with these niche strategies is like there's a bit of and it's always going to be true with like whether it's emerging, PMs or anything like that. It's just like you have this chicken and egg problem around track record, which is like, okay, here's something new and different. Which is partly why it's attractive, and then all the LPs are saying, or the lenders are saying, okay, fine, prove you can do it, and it's like, how do you solve for that?
No, it's hard, and that's where like family offices, to your earlier point, come into play. I mean, a lot of this stuff gets off the ground because someone at a family office that doesn't have a narrowly defined buy box says, "This is cool. Let's get behind it. Let's." Make a PropCo seed investment into an operator. Let's do something on the co-GP side. Let's come along with programmatic capital because we're not a private equity firm. We don't have to get a return in 5 years. Let's make a bet that this space is going to mature over a long period of time. And if in the worst case we own a portfolio of RV parks that are throwing off 9% cash on cash yield, well, that's not the worst thing in the world, even if it doesn't mature and turn into something bigger and Nuveen takes us out in 10 years. So a lot of this does come down to, can you get an individual family office, some scion of whatever, jazzed about it?
Yeah. And that's the other part of it too. Or I guess, when I related, I mean, how do you can you ever get lenders? Are there any like regular institutional lenders who will get behind this stuff, or they just, yeah?
So there's generally two types of lenders people go after for doing this. And sometimes they go after them both at the same time and layer them on top of each other. One are going to be your local banks. Like, let's say you're rolling up RV parks. There is a local bank that knows that RV park and is willing to lend against it at some level. Now, they're not that sophisticated. They're not really, lending on a cash flow basis, so they're going to give pretty low leverage, but they will kind of get you from 0 to 1 on a site-by-site basis. So local lenders are kind of pillar one. Pillar two are going to be more structured credit, hedge fundy groups, like your Davidson Kempners, your Rialtos, People like that. Saluda Grade is another. There's a bunch of these that actually it's not a bunch. There should be more, but there's a handful of groups that are kind of hedge fundy, kind of alternatives groups that will say, "Hey, this is interesting. I could do like a mezz loan across this portfolio of funeral homes and generate a 12, a 14, and I've got this kind of hybrid debt equity structure." And so you usually see operators kind of mixing and matching like the local bank with the structured credit folks.
Yeah, but for them, I guess it has to be a certain size to be interesting, right? Because if it's too small too early, they're probably not going to want to do it or take the time
But
to do it.
it's a lot smaller than what a PGIM's looking for. So they're saying, "Hey, can I put $500 million to work?" One of these structured credit operators might be saying, "Can I put $50 million to work?" So it could be an order of magnitude.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. I think about that. Whether or not the shift from bank lending to non-bank lending, whether that and the increased appetite for more unconventional approaches, as well as just like huge amounts of demand on the capital side for assets, for cash generating assets that they can lend against, whether that would open up some more niche strategies that or at least a willingness to do them in a way that banks traditionally may not have. But I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's possible. Why don't I guess like you mentioned before, some of the challenges that a venture backed company might have, or OpCo, PropCo. Like, why isn't this a better spot for venture backed companies? Like, why aren't there more tech companies that are pursuing niche strategies, like that they have figured out something that they can do that traditional operators can't? Or maybe they are. I don't know.
Well, it's really hard to generate a venture return touching sticks and bricks. And at the end of the day, these are asset management companies, and like asset management companies can trade at a great multiple and be, big companies, but like that takes a while, and it doesn't really naturally fit in the venture return model that is very attuned to SaaS, marketplaces, companies with big network effects, things like that. I mean, an asset manager, you don't have network effects. Like the closest you get is cap rate compression, and that's hard to explain to a VC. So
Right.
I think there's, you have seen companies kind of go at it, but it's been tough to then justify the valuations they've gotten, which have, and once you're kind of behind your skis on the valuation, it's tough. Like, it's tough to incentivize employees. It's tough to raise that next round. You've got to always kind of explain things to your capital partners on the LP side, on the PropCo side. It becomes awkward. So there's a lot of things that make being venture backed hard when you're going after like niche asset management.
Right. And it's also like, it's something that I talk to people about sometimes. It's like there's a difference between, or maybe there should be more of a difference, and we're increasingly seeing it, like between a venture-backed technology company and just like a tech-enabled company, which isn't necessarily venture-backed. Because venture has these expectations for outcomes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I write about this a lot on Thesis Driven, like the need for capitalization models that are not VC, but more than a family office, angel investor, bank, like your other traditional means of capitalization. So we've written about this idea of like the PropCo seed investor, the group that can like, come in and put some seed capital behind an OpCo and a PropCo. And these things are happening. It's just, I think there's a broad...
Can you just define those for like the PropCo OpCo distinction?
The PropCo would be a firm that owns the real estate. The OpCo would be kind of the asset light management firm that probably owns the brand, the technology. You see different variations of this, but you saw a few companies try to do like venture backed OpCos with PropCos, and that runs into this like problem of VCs don't really understand that model. It's not. You're not really able to generate the kind of return profile venture capitalists are looking for, so that's challenging. But you then have a firm that comes in and says, "Hey, we're going to take kind of a co-GP stake in a firm. We're going to back the first dozen deals in a PropCo, and then we want some chunk of the, we want some chunk of the GP. We want to be in the driver's seat when you go out and raise the big PropCo, and we want to participate in those fees. So there's, that kind of PropCo seed investment. I think it's a good thing that's happening. It's just, part of it's slow because even though there's a lot of recognition that this is needed, it's a tough capital markets environment right now.
Yeah, right, and it's hard to justify, unless you yourself have a lot of money lying around. If you're trying to raise LPs, LP cash around that strategy, it's like, well, what are you doing exactly? But that said, like the idea that there should be huge operating leverage to be gained from like technology, especially when the core problem is that these strategies are not worth the effort for larger for larger shops. Well, it's like, okay, if technology gives you scale to make these things worth the effort, like it should create opportunities for tech enabled deal sponsors. I would think. I just haven't seen a ton of it.
I totally agree. I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. There's just no like popularized capital market structure to fund these companies.
Jumping around. So what about conversions? And I just wrote about this the other day about the sort of conversion from industrial to self storage. It's my sense that like real estate has done better. Talk about niche strategies, like has done better in conversions than it has elsewhere. And I don't know again how to define that elsewhere. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I don't know. I guess the question is why. If I'm right, why has it been relatively easy to get people comfortable with conversions relative to other kinds of things?
So, I mean, it always depends on what's being converted to what. And when a lot of people talk about conversions these days, they think you're assuming office to residential, which are challenging for a whole host of reasons and, are going to happen.
But those have been they've been doing pretty well, I thought.
Yeah, they're totally happening, but I think there were a lot of theories around that this is going to solve the housing crisis and lead to a renaissance in urban America, and that's not going to happen. But I think smart people have gotten their hands on some of these deals that do pencil and do make sense when the zoning works. When rents are high enough to justify the construction cost, and they've been making them happen. So I think that's going to happen. I can't speak to like industrial to self-storage conversion. That seems like it might be fairly straightforward. You've got a big box and are converting it to a bunch of smaller boxes. So I think it can help the capital markets pitch if it allows you to move faster than ground up. Or you can have some in-place cash flow and stability while you're doing the conversion, so it looks more like kind of value-addish and less like completely opportunistic. Now, it's not always possible. It's very hard to have office tenants in an office building as part of it's getting converted to residential, but maybe with an industrial to self-storage conversion, it's more viable.
But I guess, so that makes sense. I guess like part of the question though is like why, it seems so hard to get any zoning or regulation change passed. Yeah. In other contexts, but it doesn't seem to have been the same kind of barrier for conversions, except I guess maybe as it pertains to schools for some reason. But maybe, I don't know. Maybe nobody's tried. That's sort of the thing that I'm like. Why was it so easy to convince regulators to turn old industrial spaces or into offices? Or maybe it wasn't. I don't know. Maybe it took a long time to get the Domino's factory to office.
Well, I mean, we're still working on it in New York City. I mean, it's not like it's possible in some zones, not in other zones. I mean, there was a great write-up I saw on Twitter the other day by a New York real estate developer effectively detailing how entire chunks of the garment district are completely obsolete. They're still zoned manufacturing. And there's no manufacturing happening in the garment district of Manhattan anymore. Like that's a relic, and that's not coming back. Previously, these things would be converted to hotels because you could do a hotel in a manufacturing zone. Thanks to the very last act of the de Blasio administration, as a give to the Hotel Trades Council, you can no longer convert buildings in a manufacturing zone to hotels. And in fact, hotels require a special permit, which is very, very, very difficult to get. I don't think anyone has yet achieved a special permit to a hotel. So we've effectively had a moratorium on new hotel construction in New York City for the past 5 years.
Yeah.
So
And then
that's
the
it. That's a
Airbnb
totally
ban
different
also in
topic,
the
though.
middle.
But it's not
Yeah.
always easy to get these conversions done. The
Well,
one
it's
thing I would
related because maybe that's the answer. Is like the answer is that it'll happen as long as there's no very interested stakeholder on the other end of it that's interested in making it not happen. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think New
Yeah.
York is. I don't want to spend too much time on New York City as a market. It's incredibly anti-development, and we're shooting ourselves in the foot and giving ourselves a massive housing crisis for no reason. But you know, I do generally think if you're doing a conversion, one of the big barriers to that is removed, and that you already have this box sitting there. So you don't have to worry about height and views and shadows and all that stuff because you already have this box. It just happens to be an empty office building. And so it does remove some set of NIMBY objections from your typical rezoning.
Yeah. I mean, right. I mean, how do you it's like, okay, this used to be an empty manufacturing whatever. It's like, okay, now you're going to turn it into something else. It seems hard, from a NIMBY perspective to object. And again, like I don't know, I've sort of been impressed. I thought that the even the office to resi conversions would be more bogged down than they appear to be. It seems like everybody's kind of been gung ho and it's gone pretty well where it's possible, and nobody's kicking up a ton of dirt. I don't know. Seemed that it's gone better than I expected.
When they don't need rezoning, they've been fine. In some markets where they have needed rezoning, they're fine too. But in New York, all the office to resi conversions you see are in commercial zones, not in manufacturing zones. Unfortunately, the most distressed office properties in New York happen to be in manufacturing zones. Like most of Midtown West is in a manufacturing zone, not in a commercial zone.
And it's just stuck that way.
It's
That's
just stuck
interesting.
that way.
Yeah. What about, I guess, elder care? Like, this is a thing that I think about a lot. I mean, partly it's not just a real estate problem. It's just, but if you think of people getting older is a massive secular tailwind, probably the surest one we've got. And yet it seems like the elder care, at least the, nursing home, for lack of a better word, like that, people make money, but not in the traditional ways. Like, they don't seem to make money in through yield. It seems like they just kind of like build it and then refi it out in all kinds of sketchy ways. Again, casting broad aspersions on the entire industry is not entirely fair, but that's been my impression. It seems hard to make money in this space. Why can't we do it better, or is anybody doing it better?
I don't have a good answer to this one. I don't have that deep of a set of experience on the senior care, elder care issue. I would say that labor is a huge issue there. It does tend to be very, depending on what type. I mean, there's a billion different types of senior care, from truly memory care, assisted living, to active adult communities that many of those do quite well. It does seem to be kind of related to a combination of how dependent are you on labor, like specifically nursing labor, and how much is it a consumer product versus a government product.
Right. Like, in other words, who's paying for it? Are
Correct.
you dependent on reimbursements, or is it can you create value
Correct.
that consumers can and will pay for? I did like the little bit on the multi-generational. I don't know if you remember that. That was one of the niche strategies, the multi-generational one. I don't know if you want to talk about that one for 2 minutes.
Yeah, I love that. So I
That was
interviewed
fun.
Scott Chopin, who's the founder of a company called Urban Pacific, and they build multi-generational communities. Very, very cool. They do it in primarily working class neighborhoods in California, where normally someone would go in and build, either kind of class BB plus garden style apartment communities of 1 and 2 bedrooms, or single family homes. They are going in and building townhouses of 4 or 5 bedrooms. And it's a very strange product for these markets, but they've really found a niche in multi-generational, primarily immigrant communities, where you have 3 generations and then some often, aunts, uncles, grandparents, parents, kids living in one home. And they tend to be really good tenants. They tend to take care of the property, and they can pay. They're paying, his rents you were quoting were 35, 4,000, 4,500 a month in kind of working class neighborhoods for new build townhomes, and he was doing very well from that with a product that just like didn't exist in the market. I mean, you have people go in and if they're serving a working class community, they don't assume that they can charge 4,500 a month, so they build a kind of crummy 1-2 bedroom apartment and charge much less. But he's saying no. If you serve a multi-generational household, you have multiple income earners in one household, you can charge way more, and that's more of the product they're looking for that doesn't exist. The only 4 and 5 bedroom things out there on the market, other than some weird co-living, are beautiful luxury
Palatial.
homes in exclusive wealthy neighborhoods that are not on the rental market. They're being sold for multi-millions. So they came in with a really unique product and are doing very well with it.
It's interesting. I mean, it's not like California is known for its open-mindedness when it comes to different kinds of housing inventory. So they were able to pull it off.
Yeah, well, I mean, remember, you can almost always go into a place and build really big single-family structures. Like, they happen to be building townhomes, so there's obviously some, they're not just going into straight-up single-family neighborhoods. They're going into places where you can have a lot of dwelling units per acre, but they're not doing something that would normally, run afoul of zoning officials. They're building big...
Just feel like there's so much opportunity. It's like you can't have... There's got to be, some FAR requirement for the number of bedrooms per square feet or something like that.
A bedroom is not defined in most zoning code. A lot of code is just they think in terms of square feet. They think in terms of units. They may think the New York City code thinks in terms of living rooms, which includes bedrooms. You do have some that tries to estimate the number of bedrooms to calculate parking requirements, but it's usually a very, very fuzzy thing. Some does, some do, some don't, but it's not as common as you might think.
Is there any niche that kind of flamed out unexpectedly? You were thought that that they had some promise, and just for whatever reason it didn't work?
I feel like a lot fall into that category in various forms. There was a lot of interest in mobile home parks a few years ago. I think there's a lot of growing regulatory interest there, and people have kind of pulled back. Some have pivoted to more recreational RV parks there, so it doesn't have quite the tailwinds it used to have. One that I think a lot of people would say kind of flamed out that I would disagree with is ADUs, accessory dwelling units. I think there have been a lot of talk of ADUs are coming, they're going to be everywhere. I mean, there's still huge regulatory barriers with them. But if you look at California, where they've removed most of those regulatory barriers, ADUs have happened. I mean, 20% of all new homes in California in 2023 were ADUs. It's probably higher than that because a lot of ADUs were built without permits. But it is a real need, and it is happening just largely just on the West Coast right now.
Interesting. I was going to think, I haven't heard that much about ghost kitchens lately, although maybe there's still there.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I feel like they're happening. They're just not a separate real estate class.
Fair, yeah.
Anyone can take a second floor space or a...
It's more like a niche leasing strategy than a real estate strategy. Yeah.
Ghost kitchens definitely exist. I mean, I live in New York City, and you can look up on Seamless, and definitely a lot of ghost kitchens operating on Seamless. So it's a thing. I just don't know if it's not real estate strategy in my view.
It's the other thing I was thinking about is why I don't even know how you would do it, but I feel like if you went out there and tried to figure out a way to get land that was entitled for the small scale nuclear reactors, it's just be okay, I found a place and you're permitted to build one of these things. I feel like that would be a great strategy.
I think anything where you're contributing back to the electric grid is going to be a great strategy in the coming years.
Yeah. Yeah, I've already seen some of it, I guess, with the solar subsidies and things like that. But not necessarily with nuclear. Are you, last question before we go, are you, long or short padel or paddleball or both?
And, it feels like there's a new one of these, like, whack a ball around games that comes around about every, like, half dozen years. And I've just kind of ignored them.
Tuned it out.
Yeah.
You're not bullish on the huge padel complexes, I guess. I guess they're probably easy to repurpose if they go
Yeah.
away. I I just see so many sad, empty like tennis racket clubs, and it makes me think. But I don't know, or maybe just people should play more tennis. Um, yeah, or we just go back to like using animal bladders or something. Just keep it simple. All right, that's all I got. I don't know any concluding thoughts on niches or on any part of this. You don't have to.
Look, I mean, this is something I'm going to keep following. I hear about new interesting things every week, so I'm going to keep writing about new niches. We're going to keep pushing it forward, and maybe we'll see more crazy stuff in 2025.
Yeah, look, when you do, the Brad Hargreaves rural, development in wherever you want to do it, just let me know.
It
I'm
might be
in.
happening. I might actually do
Good.
it
Good.
in between my
Let's do it.
Substack writing. I'll go
Yeah,
negotiate
We'll
with
pull
some,
a little. Yeah,
permitting office upstate.
we'll put a little nice walkable downtown. It'll be great, and then we'll just get like a big Waymo charging station, and it'll print money.
There you go.
That's what I believe in. All right, man. All right, thanks very much.
Good to see you, Moses. Thanks for having me on.
Good to see you. Okay.